Colored glass has been around since ancient times. Even the Egyptians were able to create small bits of colored glass. Stained glass became popular as an art form in the Middle Ages to show scenes from the Bible in windows of Catholic churches. But it wasn't until the 19th century that stained glass made advancements in process and product. Louis C. Tiffany is believed to have invented the copper foiling process that we will be using in this video to create our own pieces of stained glass jewelry. This tutorial video is for high school students and adults. Okay, so it's important to remember that when you're working with glass, all of the edges and corners are going to be very sharp. So you can cut yourself on them very easily. That's why it's important to have a box of Band-Aids whenever you are working with glass. It's also really important to have a sink or a bottle of water around your studio for various reasons. So if you don't have access to a sink, make sure that you have a bottle of water that's labeled "Do Not Drink." A lot of the materials that we'll be working with are dangerous. They either spin or they get very hot. So when you have long hair, you need to make sure that you keep it up instead of having it free-flowing and able to get burned or stuck in something that spins. Safety glasses are really important. Whenever you're working with glass, shards of glass can fly into your eyes, so you want safety glasses that fit properly. Having sneakers in the studio is very important, or any shoe that will cover your feet. You never want to wear sandals because of the hot tools. You never want to wear sandals because of the glass. Never walk barefoot into a glass studio, ever. These are the materials that you need while making stained glass jewelry. Feel free to pause during the list. Safety glasses, a tin-handled brush, tweezers, a Sharpie, and a binder clip, running pliers, a scorer, a plastic burnisher, copper foil tape, a pair of scissors, flux, pewter based solder, a soldering iron with a temperature control, wire cutters, round nose pliers, and copper wire, and a toothbrush. Remember while you're designing that adornment is a form of expressing identity, so different colors, shapes, metals, forms, and sizes can be used to express different parts of our personalities and who we are. For this section, you will need your glass, a ruler, your scorer, running pliers, and a Sharpie. You can use a paper pattern glued on with rubber cement or draw directly on the glass with a permanent marker. When cutting glass, you need to hold the scorer right on the edge of your paper, or on your line, and hold it straight up and down. While pushing down on the scorer, pull it towards you, straight across the glass. Now take your running pliers and line the notch on the running pliers up with the score line on the glass. If you have textured glass, score with the texture down against the table. It'll give you a cleaner cut. You need to push down a little harder than you think. Sometimes they will break on their own. That just makes your life easier. You do not need the running pliers. Some people tap on the glass with the back of the scorer to run the score through the glass until it snaps, but the running pliers make an easier, cleaner cut. The grinder is also a tool that is not necessary, but is a good investment. Grinding the edges of your glass makes foiling a lot easier and cleaner. When grinding, you want to make sure you have water in the well of the grinder, or that your sponge is wet. Having a dry grinder will cause friction and heat that will crack your glass. Hold your glass to the grinder and run it along the edge until it's smooth. For this section, you'll need your copper foil, your burnisher, your Sharpie, and the scissors. The copper foil tape has paper on the back that you need to peel off. To foil your piece, I start at the sharpest point and work my way around. As you go, fold the foil down on top and bottom of the glass. Don't pull the paper off the tape all at once. Sometimes the tape will stick to itself, and it loses part of its adhesive quality. Adhere the last bit of glass and pull down. The tape will break and you will get a cleaner edge. If you can't do this, just cut the edge off and fold it down. While you fold the foil, it tends to bunch up and create creases. Using a burnisher, you can smooth these areas out. I really like this side of the burnisher. Hold the burnisher parallel to the edge while moving it. If you are not careful, you may pull the tape up. A glass foil burnisher is not necessary, but a lot easier to use. In a pinch, I've used the end of a Sharpie or the handle of any plastic tool. You want to burnish the top, the bottom, and the sides until they're smooth. To solder, you need a soldering iron with a flat tip, your pewter based solder, a binder clip, locking tweezers, your flux in a good container, and a tin-handled brush. You must brush flux onto your piece before you start any soldering, or the copper will oxidize and the solder will not stick. The flux used in soldering can be very dangerous if ingested. The next step is to melt your solder onto your iron. Use the solder on the tip to cover the top foil first, then the sides and the bottom. You want to have enough solder to create a nice bead or curve on the top. I use non-lead based solder when working in stained glass. The typical solder used is called 60-40, which contains 60% tin and 40% lead. We all know lead is dangerous to our health, but many artists still use it because it stays liquid longer to give a nice smooth bead, and it's easier to work with. A problem you may have while soldering is that your tape could come off, and that is normally because you didn't burnish properly, or you didn't clean your piece before you put the copper foil on. Another common problem is when your soldering iron seems to stick to the piece. That's because your iron isn't hot enough. Now that our piece is soldered, you have to create jump rings with a round nose pliers. Here's the one I'll use, but I'll solder this one first. It's much easier to see on a large ring versus a small ring. Of course, you need to flux the piece, just as if it was copper foil. Always use tweezers to keep from burning yourself on the solder or the iron. Your goal is to cover the whole piece with solder. I always start at the opening and then I work my way around. When you flip it over, you need to add more flux. It's not abnormal to solder the ring completely shut. Just make a new one and start over. It takes practice learning how to solder jump rings, so be patient. And if you have to make a couple before you get a good one, that's fine. Make sure to solder both sides, or else one will be silver and the other copper. Next, you have to solder your jump ring onto your piece of glass. This can sometimes be tricky. I'm going to put the piece in the binder clip so that you're able to see exactly how I'm soldering this on. Put your piece inside the tweezers. Locking tweezers are really nice because this slides, and then you don't have to worry about your piece falling out of the tweezers. Don't forget to flux both pieces. Again, it's going to take some practice to get this piece to solder to the glass. You might not get it the first time. Just make sure there's enough solder on your iron, and maybe try putting some solder, a little extra solder, on your glass piece. When adding the jump ring, you want to make sure that the area around the jump ring is smooth, or else little areas of solder that are spiky or pointy will catch on your skin and scratch you. You'll want to keep a steady hand, or you might pull your jump ring off while you're trying to smooth out the solder. The last thing I do to my pieces is clean them with soap and water. I will typically scrub the pieces with an old soft toothbrush to make sure all the flux is gone and the glass and solder shine. After cleaning, you can add a patina or blackener to the solder. If you're making a jewelry piece and you're adding any blackener or patina, you'll want to go over it with a microcrystalline wax, which will seal it and keep your skin from changing colors. So now that you have your piece finished, you can use any jewelry technique, such as adding earring wires or adding a chain, to create a real jewelry piece, not just something that hangs by itself and really has no purpose. But remember, when you are designing and creating, you need to remember who you're making this piece for, because all of these pieces show parts of ourselves and who we are. So I want you to go and enjoy creating.